Hello everyone, how's it going? Yeah, let's go ahead and continue texturing this keyboard. So there isn't too much left to do here. Let me just turn off this layer so we can just focus back in on the keyboard. So we got pretty far with the keycaps themselves last time. I'm actually really happy with how they look. I did make a tiny change between the last part and kind of what you're seeing right here. All I did was I took this gunk layer that we did and I just sort of duplicated it and turned the contrast way down and the opacity down, just so we still get, like without it we get this corner gunk, which was looking pretty good. I liked how it was piling up in some areas like right here, but now with it less saturated and the opacity turned down, it looks like it's just leaking into the middle a little bit more, and it's climbing up the walls a little bit more as well. So I think just turning that on and off gives it a nice effect. It's just kind of pushing what we had earlier a little bit further. So anyways, the keys themselves are done except for one thing. I kind of wanted to add a couple fingerprints to them. Obviously anything like this is going to be touched several times. It's the whole point of the keys, right? So one thing you see a lot of people do with their models is they'll go in and at the very end they'll sort of add in a brush for just adding fingerprints and whatnot, and I think we should do the same here. So what I want to do is, once again, we're in the keycap section. So this is just affecting keycaps, but something like this I don't think matters too much where we actually place the layer. I'm going to place a standard layer because we're not going to be using a fill layer to cut things out. Actually, no, I take that back completely. We're going to use a fill layer, and the reason I say this is because I might want to change the roughness of things later, and this is just a lot less destructive. So let's call this fingerprints, and what we can do is all we're going to want to affect here is just the roughness value. We might add some color in later, but right now I don't think so. I think it should be fine the way it is. So when you leave a fingerprint on something, it's typically shinier and a little bit greasier. Well, I guess it really does depend what you're touching. In this case though, these are pretty matte, like they're pretty flat and dull. So I'd imagine it would be a bit shinier when we're touching things. The only issue I have with something like this and adding in something like fingerprints is that we have a lot of dust and stuff that's sort of caked in here. I feel like if I add fingerprints, it might sort of get rid of that feeling, but the dust itself doesn't look like it's actually dust piling on. It seems more like it's just old. So I don't think it's out of the question to add fingerprints in this. At the very least, we should give it a shot and see where it goes. So I'm going to right click this guy, add in a black mask like we normally do, and this time we're going to be using a paint layer just to keep things nice and organized. So we can go to our alpha, we can type in finger, should have a bunch of different fingerprints in here by default, which is really nice. And when you're typing, you're going to be using kind of like your index finger, your middle finger, stuff like that. If you're me, you're going to be using your index finger because you can't type properly. But let's go ahead and grab a index finger. It's probably the best one to start with. And let's just try something out. I kind of want to make this more realistic. I'm not going to put fingerprints on every keys, but mostly just the ones that would be used more often. So like vowels are going to be affected quite a bit more than like a Z or something. And I also want it to be in a place where you'd actually notice it. Like I feel like one of the camera angles I want is something along these lines. E jumps out a lot, shift jumps out a lot. So let's try it on these areas. So if I add a fingerprint in here, let's go ahead and see if we can adjust the roughness to a point where we can notice it. It's mega subtle. You can tell it's there, but only at like these angles, which might be asking a bit. It's hard to say though, because when we have I'm gonna undo this. It's hard to say because when we do our actual lighting setup in Toolbag or wherever we're gonna render this later, it might pick up on certain angles a little bit differently. So even though it's very subtle here, I still think I'm going to include it and just sort of have it as an option. And then if we don't like it later down the line, you just turn off the layer, and it's really not a big deal. So once again, I just want to get the size right. Like this is a key, right? So it's more along those lines. And then we could even, if we want to, add color. Obviously that looks kind of silly, but what we could do is make it a little bit darker so it's like dirty, and then just set it to like overlay, and turn it way down so it's just barely noticeable. And I might even try and crunch it a little bit more with some levels so it appears a bit more defined. Get it a bit more averaged out. Something like that. In that case, I want to turn the opacity down a little bit. It's just like tiny, tiny, tiny details. Might even turn it down lower. Maybe not that low, maybe 15. Yeah, and let's see if we can sprinkle some of these around. Maybe a bit brighter than that. Can change the angle of it. Of course, we can change up the fingerprint itself. Maybe grab the middle finger here. I'm just sort of adjusting the hardness of it by holding right click and dragging up and down while holding control. Maybe a smaller sort of effect here. And then I think like the shift keys are going to be used quite a bit. So let's put one on shift, and this shift backspace is going to have a bunch coming in at from an angle with your left hand like that. Opacity, maybe these levels are a bit intense. I want it to seem more like I want to be able to see these kind of like finger marks. Like these look like a fingerprint, like touch down on them, which is nice. Maybe a bit intense in those areas. This guy has a lot of questions, you know, dropping some question marks. We can try a different one. I think this isn't the same fingerprint we were using before. Turning the hardness up. You can also, of course, hit right click and affect all this stuff here, but it's built into holding control and messing with the mouse, so I'm going to do it that way. Just add some fingerprints. You can tell someone's been using it a little bit. Maybe I should affect the color a little bit. It's gray, but I kind of want it to be a bit dirty. So brown might be a better option. I'm really liking how it looks on the E. Like it looks kind of sweaty and well used. Same with the shift and backspace. Yeah, I'm happy with that. I think I'll leave the keys at that for now, and who knows, maybe we'll come back to them later on. The next thing we're gonna have to tackle is the I wanted to do this, but then these two are separate. So let's go ahead and do the space bar first. I think this will be a bit more quick, and it's kind of like its own little area, so it might be fun to kind of tackle this. So it's definitely some kind of painted metal. We can see a scratch along here, which is a nice detail. Little white speckles all across it. It seems to be pretty universally the same material across all these guys. So let's just find a reference that we really like and can work off of pretty well. I like the roughness variation there. That's a good one to keep an eye on. Just trying to remember it's in the middle there. This is pretty crisp, but kind of too much glare. I think this will probably do. So let's see, how are we going to approach this? So let's see if there's any smart materials first that we can sort of begin to work off of. And if not, then we can just kind of layer up from there and see how it goes. As far as texturing goes, my general approach is how I went about the inside of the keys there, like layering things up as you would see them appear. But with something like this, it's very simple. So if I can find a smart material that sort of gets me most of the way there, I'll definitely take it. I just typed something in. It's taking a little bit of time to load. Let's see, painted, steel painted worn. This looks pretty solid. Let's slap it on and see how it looks. I kind of want everything to have like a little bit of rust and some paint chipping to it. That's kind of the effect I'm going for. As you can see with the keys, like we're trying to do something a little bit older in general. It's seen better days and has gotten quite a bit of use out of it. So wait for this to load. So close. Okay. So this is definitely not quite what we're looking for, but we can probably turn it into what we're looking for. And it's also a good time to sort of break it down layer by layer. So obviously this pink doesn't matter. What we have at the base is just sort of a plain metal. It's pretty dark. In fact, interesting. The fill is not sure what that's affecting, but it's a metal and it's pretty dark. It's using steel _ 002 for pretty much everything. Occlusion dirt is building up dirt in some of these grimier areas, and if I go over to this guy, I can guarantee we're going to be seeing a lot of that dirt down here. Yeah, it's pretty predictable. It seems like, well, as the name implies, it's dirt based on the occlusion, so the darkest areas. So we can turn that down. Something like this seems a little bit more natural. We're still getting a little bit there. Dirt contrast, I'm going to turn that down. Kind of want it to like slowly cake on. This area should be dusty, like that makes sense. I don't want the dust to be dark gray. I'd prefer if the dust was more of like a natural dust color, which is typically more of like a yellow. It's a bit brighter. Just like very, very subtly yellow, but something along those lines. The roughness, I don't want it affecting, I guess I do want it affecting the metallic roughness up. Dirt level, yeah, let's just sort of calm that down. Grunge amount and grunge scale is always a fun one to play with. Grunge scale, of course, is how crazy the variation is. And let's check out the grunge. I like that, makes it look a bit more natural. Don't want the grunge scale to be too high. I want it to be noticeable, all these little crazy random variations. And I might even push the color in this more. Maybe not that much. Yeah, I can see it in the corners getting a bit intense. Okay, that dust is not too bad. Is there anything else we should change? Seems fine to me. Grunge, it's all good. The metal, I do actually want to change something. So we have these gigantic scratches on them. I don't really like that. So I'm going to just offset this. Just going to change where the map is and kind of move it so the scratches aren't on there. And I might even rotate it because there's kind of like a brushed metal pattern to it. I just want it to be more aligned with the horizontal nature of this spacebar a little bit more. That seems a bit better. It is just very dark though. I kind of want to right click and add a filter, and there should be I think it's HSL that will allow us to affect the lightness, so I can just brighten it up a little bit. We're getting a bit of a, I just think that looks a little bit cleaner. Either way, I don't think we're going to be seeing very much of the metal at all, so I think it should be fine the way it is. Rust, this is pretty problematic. I think for now I'm just going to turn that off. Let's go and check out how the paint is set up in this case. So we have, well, let's turn on the layer. Shiny paint. Worn paint. And cracks. Cracks are interesting. I don't necessarily know if I like that very much. And then this is all being applied through this mask. And obviously, I think this is too much metal showing. I think that's a bit silly. So let's affect the balance of this. Are we wanting to turn it down? Is that what we're doing? Curvature. Curvature seems to be a big factor in this. I definitely want a little bit of metal showing, but like tiny blotches like that would be ideal. Global contrast. Thickness. World space opacity. Curvature. Yeah, I don't know if this is the best mask for it. Also these cracks, I want to mess with this a bit. So this just seems to be like a layer that is height being driven by a fill layer, and then we can just like affect the intensity of the fill layer. So I want to turn it up actually. I kind of like having these subtler grooves. But I'm going to change this from triplanar to UV projection. Maybe I'll affect this a little bit more then. Contrast, turn up a little bit. I like these little nicks. But the scale seems a little crazy. Let's just sort of mess with this a bit. Turning it to 2, and then also the height. The height's a bit low. So subtly affect that, because the spacebar is going to be beaten up quite a bit, right? Like this is like a thing that you're constantly hitting. So let's change this even more subtle. I want it to have imperfections, but I also want it to be realistic. So we also have to choose where our imperfections are going to lie. So let's just mess with the offset a little bit, just to see if we can get some different use out of this texture. I don't like these super thin lines. Let's try and rotate. I wouldn't mind them if they were going like with the grain of the spacebar, but they all seem to be going against it. Something like this, I don't mind. It's super subtle. I like having a bit of a chip there, so it seems a bit more varied. This is very overpowering though. This is like the only thing that's showing up. I want to see some of the other paint as well. It's interesting that it's not picking up both, but at the same time I don't know if we necessarily need two versions like blending. I'm gonna try a different map though and see if we can get something better. Let's go into our smart masks, And I'm trying to think, the only place that you'd really touch this, the only place that it would get a bit more matte would be constant use on the top, right? So let's try and find one of these where it's like dirt ground, where it's kind of like from above, essentially. Moss from above is a good example. I'm just going to try it and see if it's something that would be nice. So it's definitely focusing the top, but it's focusing the edges quite a bit as well. Let's get rid of AO. We don't want it to be affected by that. Curvature, we don't want it to be affected by that. Top-down gradient is definitely something we do want it to be affected by. Yeah, the top-down gradient is saying, hey, it's at the top, it's not at the bottom. And we can turn the level of that up a little bit. Contrast down. Still a bit intense here. Curvature, let's kill that even more. AO, kill that more. Grunge. This will be good for some roughness variation, and then let's try and mess with the levels a little bit more. Okay, and obviously the colors are completely crazy. I'm looking at this reference here and it's pretty black, right? So shiny, we want it to be very black, no saturation, but not too black. We still want it to be manageable. And then this, I don't want the roughness to be that intense. Okay, let's get the light in a better spot. Because this looks silly, right? I don't want it to be like too crazy of a blend. Let's actually just focus on getting this layer first. It's never this shiny. It's more like this kind of matte. It's somewhat shiny, but not too shiny. Even a bit shinier than that, actually. A bit brighter. It's not metallic because it's paint. Maybe a little darker. A little more reflective. Something along these lines, I think. And then when we put this on top, I don't know if this is the direction to go, actually. I think I'm gonna get rid of that. We can add in some roughness variation in just a second, but let's just build upon. Let's see what the rest of these layers do. Rust stains, which looks like they're affecting kind of just the crevices, and I kind of like having rust in these areas, but it's a bit much. It's a bit intense, actually. So we can turn the rust spreading down, turn the contrast down maybe. Or sort of go with it a bit more. That looks a bit more interesting, all things considered. These areas are a bit much, in my opinion. And the rust is spreading to the top. This is a bit of an older one, and even in this, there's no rust on top. It just doesn't really make any sense. So I don't think that's the approach to go for. Drip intensity, I'm going to turn that down. This is like a comfortable amount of rust for me. As long as it's not on the top, I might be okay with that. There's speckles and imperfections, but I think that's natural. I kind of like having that. It's a bit problematic though. Rust spreading, smoothness, rust spreading. So that's pretty low, which means it'll just be on the bottom very subtly. Can't even tell any of it's there. I guess we'll have to do rust in a different way. So I'm going to delete that. Rust occlusion will, yeah, of course, fill up the bottom like crazy. And we got to sort of hone that back a bit. contrast is on 0. I'm going to turn it up a little bit. Seems like very, very intense. The height is doing a lot. Let's see if we can just sort of get it to a place without the height. Like, I don't mind adding a little bit of brown. We need some color in there for sure, other than just the dust. But the height was just crazy. Like, if I turn this back on, like, whoa, what is going on? We can affect the height position though. Very subtle like that. I wonder what it looks like from the top. It's pretty good. We're getting a little bit of rust here maybe, but other than that, it seems fine. I like having this chip here. It's like a place I'd be touched a lot, so that makes sense to me. And then there's a sharpen layer on top of everything. Sharpen is a bit much. Maybe just turn it down a little. I don't mind using sharpen, but that's a little intense for my liking. Okay, there's still a lot of work to do with this material. First things first, kind of want to brighten this guy up a little bit, so we actually know there's something going on down here. Contrast, we can bump that up a little bit as well. Much more centered in the cavities, maybe not that much. Yeah, that's kind of cool. AO curvature, do we want to test out how the curvature affects it? It's worth just sort of playing with the settings, I suppose. Top-down gradient, no. Grunge, always fun to mess with this. Interesting, the grunge is affecting kind of the intensity of it. It's almost like it's eroding it away. Scatter. Or scratches. Micro details, curvature intensity. No, we're not going to mess with that. I'll leave this part as is for now, but there are a couple things that we're going to have to change. Kind of, I might revisit this sort of paint. The mask for this seems a little weak, but let's go look at our reference and see kind of what we'd be aiming for in like an older one. Because it doesn't really seem like the paint is peeling in too many of these, but I like this sort of effect here. That looks really good to me. We're getting a bit here. We're getting some nicks for sure, but we kind of got that with the cracks. Let's see if we can affect this a little bit more with like a color and a roughness. So for the color, white's okay, adding it a little bit brighter, but I'm going to turn the opacity way, way, way down. And then roughness. Find a good angle, just super subtle. This kind of looks like a bit too much now. Let's take a peek at this guy again. So it's at a scale of 2. If I put it back to a 1, it's a bit much. Contrast. Lower contrast seems to be better. What if we change this though and find a different type of grunge? That will kind of make some chunks taken out for us. Nothing really reminiscent of like chips or like damage taken. Maybe. But kind of scratches seem cool. A lot of good stuff for scratches, but it's not exactly what we're going for at the moment. Leaks, smudges, scratches. We can try this. It's a dirt one. Yeah, it's just adding a bump. Change the tiling to 1 to give it like a bit of an uneven wobble. I don't mind that actually. It's not that bad. It's definitely not cracks though. Lessen the height intensity even less. Roughness. Change it a little. No, it's definitely changed too much. We can actually change our layers from base color, and we can go to roughness. And in here, I can turn the opacity of the roughness down to no longer affect that, and I can go back to color, just so it affects it very subtly rather. And then go back to base color, and it seems like this darkness is coming from something else. I wonder if it's the base color. Base color is definitely doing something. But this in general is just not the direction I like to take this. I'm not too happy with that. I'm gonna get rid of that layer. all we really got here that I like is kind of this paint. So let's sort of go about this the same way we went about the keys and break this down into its fundamental kind of layers. So we got the metal, check. We got the paint, check. There seems to be kind of like a roughness to it in a sense, like a textured roughness. So I'm going to add a layer, and we're going to keep on color and roughness and height. And I'm going to add a black mask, add a fill to this right there. Let's try and find some sort of bumpy noise that we can work with. Actually, this might not be that bad. I want to turn it way up. Let's try 10. It's going against the grain right now, so I'm going to rotate it 90 degrees. And then from here, we can turn the balance down a little bit. I don't want to affect the contrast too much. And let's dabble with the height a little bit. Just very subtly. And then the color, I'm going to turn it way down. But it's just adding some variation, right? We're getting a little bit of, like, it's giving us that kind of effect that the paint is starting to go and give. I think that's definitely helping this a lot. It actually looks like it's been painted now. As for the roughness, do I want the roughness to do too much? Not necessarily. The roughness, it's too specific. It's like if I go to our roughness view, like it's kind of affecting everything, isn't it? So I might just take it and bring it up a little bit from what the base value is, and say that's getting us closer to what I'm looking for. These little guys are fine. I kind of want to make the paint a little bit brighter. Everything here is so dark. And I mentioned this in the last part, but I can't stress it enough. Never make your blacks completely black. Never make your whites completely white. You want things kind of from the 20 to 80 range, or 30 to 70 might be even more proper. So kind of always stay around that part. I'm going to call this surface imperfections. Yeah, and let's see if we can affect this mask a little bit more. I want to see if there's actually a different smart mask that we could probably use to a better effect. Surface worn might be a good place to start. Before I slap that on, I'm going to save just in case I want to go back to this. But there's always like one of these that you can find that's kind of, you know, more or less what you're going for, and surface worn is technically what we're going for. I don't want it to be to the effect that like paint is getting shredded off, but kind of just like little areas getting chipped is what we're going for. In that case, so maybe surface worn might be a bit too powerful, and I might go for like edges, just specifically edges getting chipped away, because that's where it's most likely to get like an angle and like clipped off. But once this is done saving, we can just sort of check out a couple different ones. All right, so we had a bit of a crash there, and I just got everything back up and running. But this was a pretty cool opportunity to see how everything's looking stacked up against the rest of the model. It's all coming together pretty nice, which is cool. But let's go back and focus in. Ironically, before the crash, I was mentioning how we can lower our texture resolution, which will put less strain on our computer. I still think I'm going to need this to be 4K to see all these details, but I am happy with how this paint is coming out. Looking at this area, we still have some of these surface chips, so I still need to add these in. So we have surface imperfections. I'm going to make a new fill layer, and we're going to call this like surface dents might be a more appropriate title for something like this. And it's just going to be roughness, color, and height. In fact, I'm just going to focus on the height right now, so let's just deal with that. Black mask, and well, let's just affect the height first, so we have something to work off of. Height, and then add a fill, and let's go ahead and find like back to our grunge selection. Grunge. Wow, I can't spell. Grunge. There we go. Something with any kind of like thing that we could force to look like maybe chips out of something if we affect the levels on it a little bit. This maybe. It's subtle enough, but if I crank up the contrast, affect the balance, maybe not. I want like bigger pieces. I wonder if I turn up the contrast a ton. No, that's definitely a very different look. Dirt grunge maybe, because we have all these different shapes. Or I think that's what we started with. Let's see. Anything with a lot of white and dark contrast, this might be exactly what we're looking for. Contrast, balance, and then I think the height is inverted for some reason. I'm liking these big chunks right there. That's not bad. Let's see if we can affect things like the scale. If I set it to 3, it's definitely a bit much. 2. And I want to add a levels to this so we can really kind of pinch it into being like little chunks. But even then, that's it just really isn't the right material for it. Maybe cells. I think cells might be what we're looking for. These are kind of chunky. This might be a really good one. If we scale it way up, maybe not that much, but this is kind of like a chipped look, kind of like that. Turn the contrast up, balance to be way lower. I'll affect the levels on it. No, I'm gonna get rid of that. Let's see what the rust was giving us before again, because it might have given us some details under the surface. Rust. Go back over here. What was this doing? Rust spread. Was this only affecting under the paint, I wonder? In that case, maybe the rust above is something we could play with a bit more. Looking at this, we kind of have it creeping up the edges, so I don't mind actually pushing it a little bit further in these areas. Curvature. Getting a little bit here actually. Definitely not what I'm going for, but I do want a little subtle climb. That might be not a bad idea. Very, very subtle though. What else can we add to it? We do have a bunch of little dots, so let's add in some speckle. This is going to be in our paint layer, near our surface imperfections. I'm just going to call these speckles. This will add a little bit. So just height, roughness, and color. Turn the color way down. Turn the height down a little bit. Add a black mask. Add a fill layer. And just some noise for this. Random noise. Black and white spots will be fine. Balance. Turn this up to like 15. Yeah, we're going to have to crank the contrast. Make it about 50-50. Let's add a levels to sort of crank this out, and then on the other hand, we need something that's more speckled, so let's just go for a straight up Perlin noise. Crank up the contrast. Maybe have it tile a little bit less, like 5. Yeah, and I like this. Some very subtle basic surface grime. These lines are weird. I don't know why it's stretching quite like that. Let's see if we can get it a little bit better with the levels. A bit more subtle. And then I'm going to rotate it 90 so that some of those lines that were very vertical kind of go away. And then this is supposed to be very, very light. This is actually giving us kind of those chipped looks that we're going for. It kind of looks like some chipped paint. Looks a bit more rough. Let's double check the roughness. It is definitely higher, which is good. Change this back to material. We can play with this a bit more. See if changing the position does anything. Yeah, it just looks more dinged up and scratched and used in general. Yeah. Especially from the top, I'm liking that. Just kind of getting to pretty much where I want it to be. And this is good because we can use this as kind of like a foundation for the actual frame of everything later on. Okay. The only thing to really affect now is this mask. I'm going to save again because this is what crashed everything last time. So maybe we can be a bit more delicate with the mask that we pick. We can actually make our own masks from scratch using a generator. So maybe we should go about it that way. We'll kind of ease everything into it, and it's not just gonna completely blow up like it did last time. But the saves are taking quite a bit of time now. This is a pretty complex Substance Painter scene, all things considered, with 3 different layers and 3 different sets of bakes. So there's no point rushing it. Just let it do its thing. Okay, so I'm gonna get rid of this. I'm going to, oh, there's some rust there. That's pretty cool. This guy, yeah, let's hide him for now. Let's add a generator. And in here, we're gonna do either mask editor or mask builder. Let's try mask builder. This is gonna be a mask from scratch. So we can affect things like AO, curvature, all this. What do we want to be affecting our mask here? I'm going to turn down curvature at the start. In fact, I'm going to invert this because it seems like it's doing the opposite of what I want. Turn up the levels until I get some basic wear scratches. I actually don't mind having some scratches on there. The scratches actually look pretty good. Scatter. No, we do not want that. There's got to be more effects for the scratches here. Micro details. Maybe I'll turn down the scratches a little bit. I do like that a lot though. Very subtle. The paint has been kind of sliced a bit. Top-down gradient. No, don't want to mess with that too much. I am liking that a little bit. It kind of looks like maybe there was some tape on there at one point and it got sort of ripped off. Curvature. Yeah, the edges are getting these nice little chip effects on it. AO. Yeah, I don't necessarily want AO. So AO is going to be the stuff down here. The paint would be more likely to chip from the top, I would imagine, because that's where people are interacting with it. Grunge. Okay. That's a bit much. Sorry about that. Roommate just called me super quick. Let's see, where were we? Yeah, we're sort of messing with this mask and getting some more chips in there. We're finally getting it to a place where I think it's looking pretty serviceable. I think that's pretty cool. Level. No, we want it to be pretty subtle, like where it was. Contrast, though, maybe turning it up might be the right call. So it's more like chipped away. We don't want it looking too procedural. We don't want the edges to be like super obvious. And we do have a UV seam here. So I'm turning triplanar on to kind of avoid UV damage and see how this affects it. Yeah, triplanar is not the way to go. So I'm going to turn it up a little bit. And then we can just paint it to be a little bit more natural, right? Yeah, I'm going to right click, add paint, and we can just sort of like paint in these areas so they seem a bit more fine-tuned, because there's definitely a clear texture seam here where the shell is sort of cut off. So let's go into alpha. Let's find one of these brushes that is pretty easy. Turn the softness down, and I'm going to have this on pretty much black. Or do we want white? Yeah, sorry, we want white. And I'm just going to sort of go over it where it's really soft and just like soften the edges a bit so it's not as obvious that there's a seam there. I'm definitely erasing a lot of it, but I think that's better than having a an obvious texture seam. This line here's a scratch, I'm guessing. I don't know how I feel about the placement on that. Let's check the mask and I like how it looks when I turn the grunge up, but it's once again giving us more of that issue, so let's paint that out a little bit. Just so it blends a bit better. I just don't want the harshness of it. That's weird. I guess it kind of looks like a scratch. Is it the same on this side? No? I might leave that for our spacebar for now. Let's see if we can sort of mess with the rust a bit more. I'm going to take this rust and put it above the paint layer. And see if we can mess with it. The height position would go down, so it would be cutting in if it was rust. So let's sort of adjust that accordingly. And that, oh, I love how that looks actually. It's kind of cool. Cavities. Interesting. I might want to brighten this up more. Sort of like aged, gross rust. Desaturated as well. Looks pretty good. Let's mess with this guy and see if we can get any cool stuff with it. I think it's kind of... Oh, that's something different. We'll return this guy. Yeah, that's too much. We'll return to that guy in a bit. But let's mess with this. Rust spreading, rust contrast. It's very sensitive. Interesting. I do like the spot that it's like just naturally sort of found itself on. The drips seem a little procedural. I'm going to turn the drip intensity down. Like way down. Drip sample amount all the way up. That's what we want. We want it to be dripping in the y-axis, so up and down. Color is definitely a bit whack now that I look at it. No, actually, I think that's fine. Right. So these areas are almost never going to be seen down here, but nevertheless, that other rust was really not doing it any justice. And this guy, okay, he's still getting picked up down here. I like how it's affecting it down here. Very, very, very subtly, and then this one will be more of the cavity rust, which is cool. Contrast is mega low on this. Let's turn the contrast up. Just a bit in the cavities, maybe that's a bit much. Grunge. Is this affecting the top at all? A little bit crawling up the sides, and we can see that yeah, in areas like this it's pretty bad. So I'm going to add a paint layer, and just like with the other part, we can manually paint out some areas. Just like tell it to chill out a little bit here. Maybe not that much. We can actually change our brush to like a gray tone to sort of give it a little bit of rust, but not completely, and then change it to black for the areas we want it to be completely gone. And maybe this model might be a bit easier to see what's going on with. I just want it in like the actual crevices. That's what I'm mainly focusing on with this. Like right here, I don't want it. The rust hasn't spread too intensely for this guy. At least that's what I'm going for. Just a little bit. This is pretty crazy. It's too subtle. I'm going to turn this to more of a just a dark gray and soften the brush up quite a bit. Yeah, cool. Pretty happy with the space bar. We might return to this depending on like this really depends on how we do the frame. If we hit the frame with like the same kind of rust, like this will make sense. But if we of course have a different style for the frame itself, we'll have to keep them synced so that these two materials are pretty similar. I'll probably start from this guy and edit it on this, and then it'll be somewhat similar, but since we're starting here, it only makes sense to kind of have that in mind. But I think that's in a good position. Sharpen. We now have more going on there. I'm cool with that. And yeah, I also want to add some fingerprints, which I'm going to put above the sharpen layer actually. Just exact same thing we did before. Base color and roughness, and we're going to call it fingerprints. Is that one word? 2 words? Fingerprints? I'll just do it as 2. And hit a black mask on there. Add a paint layer. And we can start painting in our fingerprint. Looks like one word apparently. What would you hit the spacebar with if you're like a professional typer? Your thumb or your index? I'm assuming index. So we can have a bunch of these, kind of like where your hand would naturally hit it. Not so much like in that. Oh, we also have these like multi-finger ones, so maybe this is a better approach. It's dripping down. I feel like it never used to do this. Wonder if this is a new setting. Backface cull. Tangent warp. Tangent wrap, sorry. Camera? Yeah, that's more what I'm used to, I think. Tangent planar? No, it's definitely tangent UV. UV might be what we're going for, but I think tangent wrap is going to help us. No, camera. We're going to do camera. Or UV might be more natural. I'm just trying to think of the size of this. How big are your fingers compared to this? Probably something like this, right? In which this case, let's go ahead and change this to overlay. Maybe make it black so it sticks out more. Turn the color to almost invisible. And the roughness down. We want like greasy, slimy fingers. And yeah, they're noticeable for sure. I think that's mostly the color though. Let's turn the color down. There should be almost no color. The color is like an assist that's sort of helping it pop. But you can notice they're there for sure. What other fingerprints do we have? Let's go back to our paint layer. This is for the other hand. I'm going to turn this up a little bit actually. Just like while we're painting it, we might as well be able to see it a bit better. Change to some more individual fingers. Oh, this is a good one, just like 3 main fingers. And then if we turn the opacity down to like 5, you can tell someone's been pressing it. Yeah, it's a bit too obvious now. Opacity to like 3. And see if the roughness will make more of a difference. I just want it to be mega subtle. We may have even gone overboard with it. Let's go back in and change this to black. And I'm gonna turn this back to white. Let's get rid of this paint layer actually and start from scratch. Add some in there. I think individual fingers is just going to be better all around. Middle finger. Let's get some pointer fingers. A thumb, if there was to be a thumb, would be like more in the middle at an angle, right? Say like your index finger's on the K, you'd stomp it with a thumb there. Get another thumb, which we can do from a different angle, like so, same idea. Finger on the corner here. Yeah, let's turn this opacity back down to like 3. I don't want it to be like very visible by that, but by the roughness instead. And it seems to be doing its job pretty well. Yeah, you can definitely tell this has been used quite a bit. I'm liking that a lot. Sweet. I'm wondering if we should do a little bit more before wrapping up this episode. I think what we could do probably is we have some screws just like here and here, and like they're just tiny details, some at the bottom as well. Let's just go ahead and do the screws, just because we can, right? Screws, and then everything else is in one layer, and we can finish that off in the next part pretty quickly. Let's go ahead and do that. So screws. Oh, we're including this in screws as well. Let's uninclude those for now. Let's add a paint layer to this. I'm going to uninclude those, and we're just going to focus on the screws because I want these to be a little bit different than the screws anyways. So I'm just going to sweep in here with a black mask in polygon mode. It seems that we sort of affected into here. So I'm going to go from this angle. Which means we got these screws, and these. Cool. Start working on them. The screws aren't going to be really intense. Like I'm probably just going to go for like this kind of look. And I feel like there's definitely a smart material that will get us most of the way there. Since we did though finish the spacebar, and we're pretty happy with that, let's go ahead and save. Just because with how much shit we have in this scene, like Painter's pretty unstable, so I'm not taking any more risks with it. Okay. Sweet. Let's find a smart material. Metal will get us most of the way there. Not looking for anything too crazy. Like a pretty simple metal with just some grime inside of the crevices, right? Steel ruined? No. Oh, also steel tank might have been a good one to try for this. This is a very good material. But we're in a pretty happy place right now. I want to try steel armor almost. I feel like that might be a good place to start. And yeah, like as far as the screws go, like there there just isn't really too much to do with them. All of these options, like for me, this is more than enough to work with. And then if we want to fix stuff later, of course we can. Base color. Maybe give it, I like how this is kind of like a yellowish tint to it. So I might just go for that. That might even be a bit too intense, just like super mega subtle. This bolt is also a lot rougher, the base metal itself. It's already close. Color variation, so just gonna add a bunch of random color difference. I'm gonna turn the scale way up because we're dealing on like a micro level. So 10, we can see a little bit of variation across it. Maybe even push it further to like 15. No, we're losing a bit. 8. No, I think 10 was our sweet spot. Unless 12. 12 does a bit more. AO dirt. Ambient occlusion based dirt. So in an area like this, it's going to be affecting the rims and the crevices a bit more. I'm going to turn the contrast up. And we're dealing with like such tiny detail. I just want some kind of difference to be noticeable. Grunge, turn that up. I'm curious to see how the ones on the bottom are looking, because there's a lot more AO down here. Yeah, that looks about right. And dirt would be there more naturally anyways. So I'm just kind of focus on this area and base a lot of things off of how this guy looks. Surface detail. Like such minute differences, I don't really know what this is doing. Run such a small scale. Edges might be a bit more important because it's more of a highlight. I'm gonna turn off the grunge because we can't even like notice it at such a micro level. But let's adjust the balance and see if we notice anything. So something at some point is getting a lot shinier. It's making the middle shinier. Not sure why. Let's turn the contrast down. Turn this down. I mean, it might be cool if we can make the middle pop a bit more. Sure. And then grunge. Just so unnoticeable with a lot of this stuff. Like, as far as the screws go, like, sure, that's... looks good to me. These are, of course, mirrored, which is fine. And down here, it's all looking pretty good. I might even just go back to the base and finish rough. Interesting. Custom grunge. Scale grunge, brush intensity. I'm just going to go to the base and turn the roughness up a little. Because it's old and dirty. We don't want it to be super shiny. Maybe closer to like 50% seems about right. Oh, and we have these guys. This is where we're going to really notice the AO dirt. Let's turn that contrast down a little bit. Turn the grunge up a little. Yeah, I'm cool with that. Maybe, kind of want to brighten it a little bit. It's a little dark, isn't it? Yeah. But even then, these are so much more matte. What am I saying? The roughness is just way higher. It's more like that. And this is just a dirtier version of it. I'm definitely more cool with that. Yeah, that's what we're going for. Cool. So that kind of means we have these bottom caps, this, and this rim of things that sort of punch the actual letters in. I put them in the same group, but they are also different materials. Like this is a metal, and this is like a painted metal, very similar to how this is set up. I feel like I might actually copy this to here when I do it, at least to try it out and see how it looks. That being said, down here we have nothing. I wonder if we can try and quickly fit something in there as well. Which I'm not really sure what it looks like down there. In fact, whatever this is seems to be the same as this here. So it might be wise to do them together at the same time because I think it is the same material. So that would mean we only have two different materials left, which would be this area and these guys. So let's tackle them in a different part. The fact that this kind of crashed means I have a bit more editing to do on this, and I have a few more files to sort of juggle. So I'm going to call it on this part. We can go ahead and regroup and finish off the keys, at least the first pass of the keys. Yeah, in the next part of this video, the next part of this chapter rather. So thank you guys for watching this part. Hopefully you did learn something. I'm glad we were able to set this up and clean this up. Pretty happy with how it's looking so far, even though it's taken a bit longer than I'd like, but it's heading in the right direction. So anyways, thank you guys for watching. Hopefully you enjoyed, and I'll catch you in the next part where we finish this off. All right, see ya.